I do want to hear your story of how you got into AI. Like, I didn't ask that. Like, what, I mean, how old are you?
First, I'm 20. I'm 20.
You're 20 years old? Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so young.
Oh, yeah.
And so what, how'd it happen? Alex, so excited to have you on the ImagineAI podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited about this podcast and to kind of see what you build out of it. So I'm, honored to be a part of it.
Yeah, for reference for our listeners, Alex and I met at the Balaji's Network State Conference in Amsterdam.
Yeah,
October 30th. That's right.
Yeah.
So almost 2 months ago.
Yep.
And it was an insane event in Amsterdam along some giant canal in a convention center. And they had Balaji had 40 speakers come through. And maybe a fourth of them were pre-recorded that he had interviewed and spoke to the audience. But otherwise, he got a lot of talent in there. And it was really interesting to hear. And just kind of the network state and all these different facets of what it takes to build a real network state, from the social side of it to the physical, where do you actually build the network state?
How does it develop?
Security issues around it, and 1,000 people came, and it was just such a cool crowd. And you were one of the cool people I met there. I was so happy I met you there.
No, yeah, it was cool. It was a ton of really interesting people. It definitely drew partially a crowd that I kind of didn't expect, right? I knew it was going to kind of bring the crypto crowd, but there was a lot of people that had, a lot of interesting ideas in kind of adjacent areas, and that was pretty cool to see and pretty exciting to see a bunch of people, thinking about the world in new ways. So.
Yeah, definitely. At that time, I didn't really, I knew that maybe 20 VC, I'd be leaving there eventually, and kind of wanted to start my own thing. And the cool opportunity that offered to me is to run the ImagineAI Live conference in Las Vegas, which is 3 months from now. And it's me and two other co-founders, one main co-founder, and he kind of corralled me in to help with social media and to get the word out. The goal of it is to get all of the top AI creators. So we've got lots of people you've probably seen on Twitter, like Linus Ickenstam and Rowan Chung.
I've seen him. He has a pretty good updates oftentimes. He does a good job.
Yeah, so he's he's hopefully going to come. It's not for sure, but he's in partnership with us. And then it's really focused on businesses, what can businesses do to implement AI to help streamline things and to get more productive. And we're trying to get a list of just power tools that hey, if you use this and this is how to use it, it's going to help you out. So really excited about that. And it's at the Fontainebleau Hotel, brand new hotel. And the founder was just there this week and sending me pictures, and it looks insane. The casino hall looks like something out of Star Trek. Just this kind of
awesome,
futuristic yet retro at the same time. It's crazy. So that's what the niche of this podcast is too, is trying to talk with, there's so much happening in the AI space every day, and it just gets more and more. It's hard to pay attention to. And I'm trying to talk to leading creators and leading builders in the AI space. And I know you're one of them. You told me that you were working on an AI startup. And can you first just kind of tell us what it is you're working on and what the goal is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess where we're starting is we're building a tool for investors in the commercial real estate space, investors and agents and brokers. And the way that we're building it is a lot of agents, the way that they understand the market today is by, working with a bunch of different investors, helping them find properties that kind of fit their investment goals. By working with a ton of different investors, they kind of know what everyone wants and what they think about and what they care about, what their investment goals are, how they think about, a good property to buy and how they think about maybe a bad deal. And what they can do is basically by talking with all of these people, they can get a good idea for, what the market is doing. And then they can also say, okay, hey, my buddy John, has this property he wants to sell. I know my other buddy James, is in the market for something like that. And they can kind of make that connection and broker a deal. Now, the issue that the best, agents have is they generally want to work with, they have tons of people that want to work with them because they have this massive network of other people that, either buy or sell properties from them. And the more people that they interact with, the better, the more properties they have access to, the better they understand the market. But the issue is a good agent really only has so many hours in a day. So what ends up happening is they don't really talk to the investors that they don't think are serious on making a transaction. What that kind of leads to is, an agent that maybe has, tens of thousands of investors that want to work with them, they only really talk with consistently maybe about 10% of them. So what we do is basically take all of the information that agent knows, all of the data that they have on the market, and put that into an AI that they can send out to those tens of thousands of investors that would normally be on their mailing list when they get a new property. They send out, when they have a new listing, they send out a property to all of their, people on their mailing list. They can send this AI out to them. And then what we do for the agents is based on the conversations that this AI has with the investors, we can kind of tell the agents, which investors are really serious and which investors are, interested in buying or interested in certain properties, or whether that's buying or selling. And the idea is we kind of want to solve this scaling problem for them. They have all this information on the market. Everyone wants to work with them, but they kind of can't work with everybody. So what we're going to do is kind of take that, what an investor would normally look for from an agent, put that in an AI so that the investor gets the value that they're looking for. And then when the investor starts to, get serious about making a transaction rather than just kind of keeping tabs on the market, we can give that to the agent and the agent can kind of take it the rest of the way and close the deal. So that's kind of what we're building. And our goal is to kind of, give every investor access to, the best agents in the world, the people that understand the market the best, the people that have the best networks, the people that have access to the most, deals and opportunities for them, and then allow the agent to kind of take more advantage of what they've kind of built and the network they've built without having to kind of lose these deals that they would normally lose because they just have a scaling issue, right? They can't talk with everybody. And if they try and talk with everybody, they're going to end up talking to a bunch of people that frankly may kind of waste their time, right? And yeah, that's kind of our goal, is to kind of give the opportunity for investors to be able to have that full-time 24/7 access in the same way that they normally talk to an agent. They can talk to an AI. And then when they're serious, we'll put them in touch with the agent and, the agent will take it the rest of the way.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. Thank you for that. What kind of real estate are we talking about here?
Yeah, so we're talking about commercial real estate.
So these are investors that are looking to invest in commercial real estate, and these are real estate agents that represent owners of commercial real estate.
Yeah, so it's really agents and kind of brokers is maybe the best way to think about it. Today, the way that commercial property would get traded is you own the property and you say, hey, I want to sell this, or I'm trying to figure out if I should sell this. And then what you would go do is go call an agent who kind of helps broker these properties. And that agent's going to kind of be able to give you the market insight and, help you kind of understand, okay, is this a good time to trade this property? Is this a good time to sell this property? Is there another market that I should think about buying into? A lot of investors have what's called a 1031 exchange. So that means if they sell a property, they have a certain amount of time that they can buy a new property and basically forego the taxes in that time period for, getting any sort of gains on that property. So, if you're an investor or an owner of a property, you kind of want to have an understanding of what's going on in the market today to kind of help you determine what decisions do I need to make, right? So our goal is to basically, when you're just kind of keeping tabs on the market and when you're just kind of thinking, okay, well, I'm not really necessarily ready to make a transaction. I just need to know what's going on so I can determine if I should make a transaction. We're going to kind of help do that for you when you would normally kind of go to an agent or a broker that would kind of do that for you. Which basically allows the agent or the broker just to focus on the investors or the owners that are actually ready to make a transaction, actually ready to sell, actually ready to buy. So that's kind of what our goal is and where our place in all of this is right now.
So what's wrong with the way commercial real estate is done and traded today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. If you're an investor, it kind of goes back to that same problem, right? Like you want to understand what the market is doing. And you can go and read things online, but really the best way to understand, especially a local market, is by talking to an agent or a broker that works specifically in that local market. And the reason that they have the best information is because they're the ones that are making the trade. They're the ones that know a property across the street from your property 6 months ago sold for this price. And a property, a few streets down from your property sold for this price. And those properties are seen as very similar to your property because everyone that I talk to that is looking for a property like this, these are the three things that they care about, right? So by knowing what the market cares about, what people are thinking about, and then also by knowing, what did those things end up selling for, they're able to give you an insight on what's going on in the market that you wouldn't be able to just get from watching someone on CNBC talk about the commercial real estate market as a whole, right? It kind of has this problem of localization matters a lot. And then for someone to really understand the local market trends, you really need to be kind of boots on the ground. And the people that get the closest experience of that is the agents and the brokers.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is the investors, they have to talk to an agent or a broker. The agents or the brokers, they only want to talk to investors that are ready to make a transaction, or at least the best ones do, because that's how they make money. They make 6%. And generally they'll split it with a brokerage at some percentage split, depending on kind of how they've set up their situation, or if there's a buyer and a seller agent, they kind of split that transaction fee in certain ways. So there's all sorts of ways that could end up happening. But at the end of the day, if you're an investor, you want to understand what's going on in the market to know what decisions you need to make. If you're an agent, you want to talk to as many investors as possible that are ready to make a decision, so you can, first off, make money, and second off, further develop your understanding of the local market at each point in time.
Great. So the problem would be that the amount of information that you get by just going to one agent is really limited to that agent and maybe his connection of agents. And when the investor goes to these agents, are they signing a contract right away typically, or is it?
Oftentimes, a lot of investors will have an agent or a broker, a few agents or brokers that they generally work with. Ideally, an agent's about as good as how many transactions they make, right? Because, and there's a lot of other ways to look at it, but the way that I see it is every time you make a transaction, you get another data point on what the market is doing and what people care about. Right. So if you understand what is motivating people to sell right now, what is motivating people to buy right now, you kind of understand, what are the pieces in the market that matter, right? At least in this local area, right? So, if you're an investor, to make your decision, you want to talk to the person who kind of understands that really, really well. And that's what these agents kind of are able to kind of build. The best ones do more deals, right? And if you do more deals, you kind of have a broader view or a larger view on a local market.
I suppose that each agent, it's their network of, it's all the nodes that they're personally doing, but all their network of personal connections and knowing what nodes they're making.
Yes.
As far as transactions go. And so How is AI going to solve this? How is your company going to solve this problem?
Yeah. So if you're an agent, all you have to do is you kind of have all of this data of all the deals that you've made and all the conversations you've had with investors. You have an understanding of the market. You basically just put that into your version of our AI, right? And then you send that out to your investors. And then our AI, you can literally have a conversation with. You can say, what's the market like in Houston? And it'll tell you what the market is like in Houston. Okay, well, what are rental rates right now in Houston? Can you give me an idea of, how much can I get a tenant to pay to be in Houston, right? To be in a shopping center in Houston right now? And it's going to say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about the shopping center you're talking about. Is it a community center? Is it this? Is it that? Right? And it's going to kind of get a good idea of, okay, well, your shopping center is like this. Well, let me look at similar shopping centers that have similar characteristics and say, okay, all right, well, if these shopping centers are, maybe doing, $17 per square foot, then you can probably, move a tenant into your shopping center at $16, $17, $18 per square foot, right? And obviously that changes a little bit because every property is kind of fundamentally unique, but you can kind of do a decent job of understanding, okay, a tenant is looking for maybe a KFC wants to be on a busy highway, right? So they're going to pay more for that space than a grocery store would pay, right? So then you're going to say, okay, well, let me find other situations that KFCs or, fast food chains are on busy highways. How much are they paying to be there? Right. And that's about how much you can go and charge that KFC tenant to be in your property next to a busy highway. Right. And that's the kind of thing that an agent would know and a broker would know and have a good insight on. And that's something that an investor would want to know to kind of be able to determine, okay, how much of a return can I get on this property? And, we're going to just be able to take what that agent knows and, provide that to their investors 24/7, 365 days a year in a way that they're used to, right? Just having a conversation. And that's kind of what we do.
It sounds like a lot of buy-in, people are giving you the data that makes your startup and the information that you have more valuable. And the more people that do it, it becomes this network effect thing where you've got more data to pull from and becomes stronger and more people want to use it to give it their data. Is that? Yeah.
So today, if an agent uses our platform, they have their own version of their AI, right? So their AI is only a reflection of their data. What we do is there is some amount of public data that we do gather. And this is just to kind of have a common grounding across something to superimpose what the agent gives us and, build on top of that. But that's really just property data, like this property exists. This is the address. This is, the zip code. This is the county, right? So then if an agent says, okay, well, that property, last time I did a deal on that property, it sold for this amount. We don't have to ask for, okay, what's the address? What's this? What's that? Right? We only have to have a small Anyways, yeah, so the agent will give us their data, but what we're not, what we do is when they send out to their investors, that's the data that the investors have access to. They don't have access to data from another agent's version of the AI, right? It's a representation of the agent that they would normally call to get that information rather than some sort of common representation across agents. And the reason that we do that is because that data is very valuable to the agent.
Yeah, sure.
There's the kind of maybe oil of commercial real estate, or at least, one of the things that's very valuable in commercial real estate is what's called a sale comparable, which is, how much did this property sell for? So what we try and do is just, make sure that when an agent gives us that data, another agent's not just going to hop on and, get that data too, at least not right now. So that's kind of.
Question. So I'm aware of the MLS, and is that for commercial real estate as well, or is that separate?
They have MLSs for both.
And what is the MLS? What is MLS?
MLS is just like, if you were just think about Zillow, right? There's just like one that real estate agents have that other people can't access, right? So if you're like in Dallas area or in Miami or I don't know how it works overseas, but if you're in a certain area, then there's an MLS in Miami, right? And then if you're a real estate agent in Florida, then you would have access to the MLS in Miami, right? Now, there is something that's called a non-disclosure state. So I think there's 13 out of the 50 states are what's called non-disclosure states. And what that means is that you don't have to disclose how much a property sold for. And the reason that you don't have to disclose it is because I think the reason that law exists is because there's property tax, right? And, you don't want your property tax going up because the sell price was really, really high, right? Mm-hmm. So you'd rather just have it be on the appraised value. So I think especially in big markets, sale prices can be a little bit more volatile when compared to the appraisal value, which is like what someone will come out to your property and say, this is what it's worth. The sale price is generally not always completely the same, especially in larger markets where there's significantly more affected by larger trends rather than just like what's going on in the immediate local market.
And so commercial real estate isn't on MLS?
I think there is an MLS for commercial real estate. I think in non-disclosure states, the sale price isn't necessarily there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, yeah. And you can see there's like a lot of companies out there that their entire job, what they do entirely is aggregate sale comps, right? Or how much property sold for. There's a company called Comstack, which their business model is basically like, if you give us, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine, right? If you give us a sale comp, we'll show you 10. Right. And then they kind of develop that network effect that you kind of referred to previously is like, okay, well, if I give you my data, I'll get more data back. And then if a lot of people do that, then you kind of have something that's valuable.
And so what's your company's special sauce going to be? Like MLS and these other companies you just mentioned that like focus on commercial real estate, trying to gather the same information you're trying to gather.
Yeah. For us, we just partner with the agent, right? The agent is the person that has the data. And then we're just going to say, hey, we can help you make more deals by being able to cast a wider net across your investors and save you time by not having to have very basic conversations that you have over and over again and only have the conversations that are going to lead to a deal, right? You don't want to, if you were to answer every phone call that said, hey, I just need rental rates in Houston, I don't really care about anything else. Right. Well, then you don't really get, as an agent, very much value from that phone call outside of an investor saying, OK, this agent constantly works with me. I trust them. They're giving me honest information, and you're building a relationship with them. But after you get to a certain point, you kind of already have those relationships. And if you want to continue to scale up, you need something that can kind of be in front of you that can still give that value to the investor, just like you would have done it. It can still give you the investor the rental rates, or what is the cap rate, the average asking cap, or what is the average sale cap in Houston or Dallas or whatever area you care about that the agent, kind of makes trades in. We're just going to kind of be that net in front of the agent. And then what we're going to be able to do is, okay, when people go to that and say, well, I'm interested in this and I think this is interesting and I'm looking for this and I'm looking for that, we can kind of distill that information and really give an agent a very pointed view of, okay, this person is very, very interested in this property and here's why. And this is why we think that be ready to make a deal, right? So then the agent, all right, now I didn't have to talk to him all the 15 times to get that. I just have to talk to him now that he's ready to make a deal.
For sure. So this is like an AI service, like a service that providing the agent, commercial real estate agent, that they're buying to help streamline their processes and make life easier for them so they can access and talk with more investors. Yes. And for investors too, it seems like if they know that, they can come and get questions easily and kind of hassle free, that it would be, beneficial to them as well.
Yeah. Exactly. They don't have to call an agent and then call them 3 or 4 times, hope that they answer one of them, right? They can just go to this platform and, even arguably get a more accurate real-time answer, because every single time you ask for rental rates, we're going to go and recalculate exactly what the new rental rates are at point in time, right?
Wow,
So
cool.
you're going to get super up-to-date real-time answers in the same way that you would normally get them, just through having a conversation like you and I are right now.
Wait, so what's the company's name again?
It's called Theus. So it's like we took Prometheus and we cut off the Promi. And the kind of intuition behind it is, we want to kind of give the power of, the ability to kind of scale yourself to everybody, which I think is kind of a larger trend, that as AI becomes more, widespread, and, we see AIs that are even embodied in the physical world, a single individual will have just as much capability for impact on the world that, normally would be only possible for massive companies or, governments or nation states, right? And the idea is that, a single individual could command, millions of AI agents on their behalf and have the same degree of impact as a person commanding, a million other people, right? And we're just kind of we're just getting in line with that trend, or maybe my kind of belief around that trend, and we're just taking the first steps into that.
Oh man, I got goosebumps just hearing that, the power of AI to just help multiply your impact and what you can do in this world and the time we have in it. It's incredible. I do want to hear your story of how you got into AI. Like, I didn't ask that. Like, what? I mean, how old are you? First,
I'm 20.
Or,
I'm 20.
You're 20 years old? Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so young.
Oh yeah.
And so what? How'd it happen?
When I was 15 years old, all my buddies were working at Chick-fil-A, and I wanted to get a job with them. I was like, I was like 15 years old. I wanted to get a job. I was excited about, making money, and I wanted to get a job with them. So I was like, Dad, I'm going to go get a job at Chick-fil-A. He was like, how much are they going to pay you? I was like, I don't know, like $8 an hour. It wasn't that much, but he was like, I'll pay you the same amount to learn something that you're interested in. I was like, okay, well, and my dad and I always used to talk about, what we kind of called exponential technologies, right? The technologies that will change the world, right? And, it's like blockchain and, CRISPR and nuclear energy and, both fission and fusion and quantum computing and AI, right? So I kind of did some like quick research, and I just, I chose AI. I was like, that sounds super interesting. It sounds like there's, it's on a strong path where it'll be very relevant in the next, 10 years, unlike maybe like quantum computing, which we keep thinking is going to be there, but it's not quite. So I chose AI. I took a few courses. I took the, if anyone's in the space, they know the Andrew Ng courses. I took a few of those. And that summer, after that, I had started, doing some internships over the summers. And then out of high school, I was hired to work on a sales AI tool company. I worked with them through college. I studied like applied math and physics in college, but I kind of knew I was never going to graduate. I kind of knew I was going to drop out and eventually do my own thing. But yeah, about 3 semesters into college, I dropped out, worked for that company full time for about 6 months, and then left and started my own company. And that's where I am today. But that's how I got, started in AI. And I'm really glad that I did. I think that was a pretty crucial moment in my life. And I'm glad that my dad kind of gave me the opportunity to focus on something else while still kind of achieving the goal of making money, but also learn something that turns out to be an incredibly valuable skill. So yeah, that's kind of my story in short.
That's amazing, and good on your dad to take that chance and give you that offer. My dad was an economist and taught me the opportunity cost from an early age, and would always give me like, you could do this, or we could do this, and one thing, there's always a cost. No such thing as a free lunch. So
that's a great mental model to have baked in from an early age. I mean, that's like
So okay, you got to just break it down for me, like really basic, because you're talking about like somebody having hundreds, thousands of AIs. What is AI?
Yeah, that's a big question, but I think it's best explained in like what fundamentally changes about the world. I truly believe that the kind of conditions at which organization between people have like fundamentally changed, right? Previously you would get together a large amount of people. Let's maybe talk about like the Industrial Revolution, right? The last 500 years have been defined pretty greatly by the Industrial Revolution. And what was really special about that time is that you could, by bringing more people to work with you, there was increasing outcomes on that economy, or increasing returns on that massive economy of scale, right? You can think of the assembly line, right? The second the assembly line existed, you no longer needed a craftsman to make a car. You just needed a lot of unskilled labor, right? And you could make cars at a scale that was previously impossible. And then the more you scale up that unskilled labor, the more returns you get on that economies of scale. So that, it actually paid a lot to, organize in really, really large groups. And I think that's kind of why we see nation states today. I think that kind of has fundamentally changed in the last, 5 years, and will continue to fundamentally change in the next 10, is that now a single individual could command, only kind of stopped by capital, how much capital they have, could really command tens of thousands or millions or just, an arbitrarily large number of AIs to basically do the same thing, right? And you can see this already with web agents, right? Like one of the things that we're doing to gather all this public data about properties and stuff, which is really kind of, not easy or wasn't easy before. All of this data is on different county websites organized in completely different ways. So if you were to, in software 1.0 kind of conditions, try and, gather that data, you'd have to build a web scraper for every single county website. Now you don't have to do that because you could just have a single language model agent that has the capability to understand the website, understand, the fields of the data, and then cross-reference those fields with different websites who name those fields, or different databases who name those fields differently and say, okay, these two fields are actually really the same thing. And normally you would need a human to kind of create that intuition. Now you can have a web agent basically do that for you. I guess maybe the larger point is that, today on the internet, you can have a ton of AI agents that do the tasks of that normally you would need a ton of people for. And then soon enough, we'll see that also happen in the real world where, if you're UPS, today you pay a UPS driver $140,000, $100 to $140,000 a year. They have to sleep, eat. They have to do a number of things. They have to, in some way, be aligned with the company. Pretty soon, we'll have self-driving AIs where UPS can completely cut their costs of human resources by probably a lot by using self-driving AIs and still get efficiency gains out of it. So it will no longer pay for UPS to employ, tons of people. It'll actually pay more for them to employ less people. And I think what that means is the most capable people of the future will not be limited by how many people they can influence to do something, but more so just be limited by how much capital and maybe as a downstream compute that they have, right? And I think that's a really important shift because, I think the conditions of the world that we live in today are really results of high returns on massive economies of scale, at least with people. The conditions of the world in the next 500 years, or I hesitate to say, such a long time period, but maybe next 50 years will actually be more closely defined by how much capital you have to basically have impact on the world. Because if you have a lot of capital, you can employ a lot of AIs, right? You don't necessarily need to employ people anymore, not as much as you used to.
Capital and compute, the two things that are needed to expand yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I still don't get how you have hundreds of different of AIs. What are all these different companies building? And Facebook's, I heard Mark Zuckerberg said that, he thinks the future is going to be just hundreds of different types of AIs. And
yeah.
And then can you help me break down, maybe answer that? And then a follow-up is how do you keep things personalized to you yourself, in your data, who you are, so that the AI knows that stuff?
Yeah. So that's kind of the open question. Okay. Now we know that we can theoretically take a bunch of AIs that do things on your behalf. Okay. But when you have the fundamental tools like language models, you can say, hey, I want this information from this website. And it's going to be able to go look at, go use a function call to go get the HTML of that website, semantically understand it just like you would, and then get you the information. But the big kind of open question is how do you actually orchestrate them? And the level at which you can orchestrate them actually pretty much determines at what level of task do you need to give the AI, right? So today you can't give an AI a task of build me a business that gives me $1 million a year, right? That's way too big of a task, right? But you could probably break that task down into a relatively large subset of tasks and then tell AIs to do that. And then, you could maybe build a business that, gives you $1 million a year, right? So the big open question is how do you kind of build AI systems that can take larger and larger tasks and then break those down into subtasks, assign those to separate, AI agents that have different capabilities, and then have those AI agents go do those things, somehow bring them back, have some sort of communication between them. And I think that's where a lot of innovation is going to happen. And there's a lot of opportunity is how do you actually orchestrate that happening? And then, your capability to orchestrate that is your capability to give increasingly complex, tasks with increasing complexity to a single AI system and expect it to actually work. But that's kind of the open question. And I think the main components of it are, how do we give AIs the ability to access the same things or similar things that we can access, right? You can give an AI, function calling capability, which, opens up a lot of functionality. this function calling capability. You could say, all right, here's a web scraping function. You put in a URL and then you get the HTML of that website, and then you can do things with that, right? And then maybe you give it the ability to, interact with some sort of SQL database, and it can, say, okay, now that I've gotten information from this website, let's just say a bunch of properties, right? Or maybe I have a file that I can download from this website that gives me, a bunch of properties. Okay, let me download that. Okay, how do I look through that information and actually make sense of it? Well, I need a Python code interpreter to kind of do some exploratory data analysis to actually read that information, right? Okay, now that I've, read and understood the information, let me go look at the SQL database with all the other properties that I have stored in my database. Let me go look at that, re-understand the schema, and then figure out how does the data that I just, did some exploratory data analysis, through a Python interpreter, how did I look at that data and how does that actually relate to the data that we already have? And then how do I match those up programmatically? Okay, well, let's use the Python interpreter again, and then match those up programmatically and then go do that, right? And that can be something as simple as, okay, this column that's named this is actually this column that's named that in our database, right? Or it can be as something as complex as, wait, this database doesn't have the addresses that most databases have addresses, but this database is missing this column. How do I go and get that information from, another website, right? Is that information exist? Is there a way for me to get that? How do I plan on doing that? And then what do I need to access to actually execute on that plan? And that could be, telling other, AI agents with different capabilities to do it, or that could be that AI agent doing it itself. And that's kind of where the complexity lies, and, where I think there's a lot of room for innovation, and there's going to be a lot of great companies that are built out of these kind of paradigms of how do you, orchestrate these agents? How do they communicate with each other? How do you determine what agent has access to what? And how do you determine, what they're able to do and what they're not able to do? And that's kind of that's the open question, but we kind of have the tools to make that happen now.
What are any other big function calls that are predominant in AI today that are being used? I think you just referenced two.
Yeah, I think there's some really exciting ones. I've been continually impressed with how well an AI can write a SQL query. We use a lot of SQL queries in our backend, and our AI will literally run a SQL query to tell you something like rental rates, and it's just incredible how well it does it. So I think LLMs integrated with SQL databases is an incredible way, incredibly powerful. LLMs integrated with web scraping tooling is incredibly powerful. One of the ones that I've kind of looked at more recently is Wolfram Alpha. Well, Wolfram API has some really, really interesting capabilities. Stephen Wolfram has built that, kind of language to understand the world. And that works really, really well with language models. So that's another really good one. I would say some other interesting ones is going to be language models talking to other language models through function calling. Giving a task to another agent through a function call. You could imagine like a function call that just says, okay, here's the task and here's what you need to take care of that task. And then that would go and create another agent with that task and then the tools that it needs to do that task. And then, I think anything that you would normally get through an API, you could just reimagine that as a function call.
What is the function of the AI talking to you, like conversing with you? I'm a little confused about like how the LLM, like, what am I missing there?
Between talking and then how does it choose between function calling? So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. The way that we do it is we give it access to function calls, and then we just, that's a certain JSON format. And then we say, okay, well, if it's giving us a JSON format, then it's a function call. If it's not giving us a JSON format, then it's just responding, to the user. But you could basically do it in any way you want. You could, say respond to user is a function call, right? You can make everything a function call. I think, and it kind of comes down to, how the model was fine-tuned. If it was fine-tuned to work in a certain way, then you probably want to just take advantage of how it was fine-tuned rather than trying to come up with a whole new paradigm. So that's what I would say is kind of the difference. But you could also have language models that don't talk to people, right? That's kind of maybe a key thing that people don't think about as much because they're like, well, ChatGPT, I just talk to it. Like, what else does it do?
Yeah.
You could have a language model who just has a task and then just carries out that task as a series of function calls and, what you could call an internal thought, which is it just generating tokens to itself to kind of further understand something.
Okay. And so the last thing I'm trying to unlock in my understanding here is the AI or the LLM, how it can know about you and like what you're about, what you know. One of the things I'm really curious about is AI applied to language learning. And I think there's so much potential to have a AI language tutor. I'm struggling to learn Korean. I've moved to Korea in 2015. I've done a lot of lessons, starting to stop, and I'm still not great. It's
Yeah.
beginner, intermediate at best. But if I had an AI tutor that kind of knew what I know
Know what you know.
and knew where I was, and then like every day I could kind of talk to it for a certain amount of time, and like you could just kind of refresh what I already know, and then just push me a little bit further down the road of understanding more. I mean, that's going to be possible. So there's that, but then also like, all these cameras and like the input you're giving it, right? And that, this is what I talked to. This is what I said to that person, like the Rewind app. And there's a few other ones out that just storing everything that, you turn it on and you say, yes, you can record all this stuff and keep it. And now you're starting to understand my speaking patterns, and the knowledge I know, the interactions that I'm having, knowledge I'm gaining, knowledge about other people, and just like storing that where you've got this like,
how do you store it?
Awesome memory.
How does AI like use it? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's going to be one of the most exciting use cases for AI is the personal AI. One day, you'll probably have some sort of hardware device that, listens and sees everything. There's a lot of people doing this today. I think Apple's best positioned for it, but we'll see how it pans out. And yeah, your AI will hear and see everything that you hear and see. And then what it'll do is you'll go to that AI and you'll say, I want to learn Korean. And then, it's going to say, okay, well, you do this a lot and or maybe English. Well, let me kind of teach you it in a way that's interesting to you. And I think that, it isn't just about language learning, but it's about learning in general, right? Like, how do you learn something? Well, you take something new and then you make relationships between what you already know and that, and then you understand the nature of those relationships, right? So if an AI has all of the context about your life that you have, right, it understands what you already know and it understands, what you don't know. And then between those two things, it can kind of teach you, all right, this is how you should think about the relationship between these two things. And it'll teach you that in such a native way to what you already know. And I think that's a hugely interesting thing. I mean, really interesting because it's a more like it's a really big question about ourselves too. Like it kind of brings about this question of English is not a single language. It's just a similar representation between different people. Right. Everyone kind of has their own representation of English, no one who necessarily has the right, representation of English, because there is no right representation of English. It's just this commonly understood set of, sound waves that people kind of commonly put together because we all have a relatively shared experience in the outer world that we can kind of make relationships between what we're saying and the concepts we're talking about and what's going on in the outer world. And then we develop that over time and, at increasingly larger levels of abstraction, right? What's really interesting is we've built language models that also have that same representation of language, or at least a similar enough one where they're capable of interfacing with us. And I think it's really, really interesting. I think in general, AI, makes us ask a lot of really fundamental questions about what we are and who we are and why we're here. I think we're really getting to the point where that's why everyone has an argument over what is AGI, what is not AGI, what should an AI be able to do, is because we just don't really have this, fundamental understanding or agreed upon fundamental understanding of what intelligence is, what consciousness is. And it kind of brings up all these sorts of questions. And you can kind of see it in just about every question of AI, even if you say how can it teach you something? It's still like such a fundamental thing that you're actually talking about. And it's super interesting.
Man, I'm so enjoying this. It's really great to hear you go on about these things and just explain it very succinctly. So bravo on the communication here. Yeah, I'm right with you in just how exciting of a time this is. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, and it's why I'm trying to focus on the space, is just to get a better understanding of it and tell other people that, hey, it's here. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to get more and more relevant, powerful, and more a part of our lives. And the sooner you start paying attention and trying to use it, the more beneficial it will be to you, and you'll be on the cutting edge and have an advantage over other people that are choosing to just kind of block it out and ignore it,
Yeah, we live in an incredible world, and there's all sorts of implications of AI, and I think it's going to really fundamentally change the shape of businesses and organizations in general, right? All the way to the nation state level, right? The returns on massive levels of organization between people are going to go down. So the most effective organizational unit is going to be much smaller, right? It's not going to be hundreds of thousands of people. I saw this stat the other day that to get a rocket to the moon, NASA employed 400,000 people. And that's such a tell of the time of and at that time we only had so much computation. So you had to have a lot of people doing a lot of things very manually, right? And now SpaceX has, I don't know how many people that they have, but it's definitely not on the magnitude of hundreds of thousands. And they're able, they intend on sending something to the moon in 2025. And, there's an argument to be made, well, we already did it, so we already know how to do it. But I would argue if we still knew how to do it, we'd probably have already done it already. But I think the point I'm trying to make is, as technology gets better, a single individual has much more leverage than they did previously to do things at a larger scale than they did previously. So something that, took 400,000 people before maybe takes 1,000 now.
Just Googled it. SpaceX has 13,000 employees.
So 13,000.
Much smaller.
Still pretty big. Still pretty big, yeah. but not even on the same magnitude. And and I'm sure we'll see that go down over time as we see, especially in SpaceX's, situation, AIs that are more embodied in the physical world, which is ironic enough, Elon Musk is also concurrently working on that.
Yeah. I think Elon Musk is a pretty good example of somebody that's like using capital and compute to try to do as much as he physically can to have impact in the world. It's pretty crazy.
And he's building the tools to increase the leverage that he has with his capital and compute, right? He's building Tesla Optimus. He's building self-driving cars, right? Not only is he leveraging his capital and compute, but he's also building the tools that will increase the leverage of that capital and compute, which is, an incredibly interesting thing.
With like Tesla recording Optimus. Everything that's happening. Yeah. What is Tesla Optimus?
So Tesla Optimus is basically humanoid robots with an AI, as a brain. And the idea there is, if we can, make a humanoid robot for $10,000 that can do anything that a human can do, but better, theoretically with a similar amount of intelligence or the effective amount of intelligence. Well, you could make a one-time payment for $10,000 for a robot that could do a fair amount of tasks that you would normally pay a person to do. Maybe you'd pay a person $80,000, right? I mean, the numbers are relatively arbitrary, but I think the scales are what matter, right? You could pay a robot to do something that a person does for a much cheaper price. And then as time goes on, the complexity of the task that you can give that robot will increase, maybe eventually to the point the complexity of the task is actually larger than what you could ask a person to do, right? Because maybe you can make a robot stronger, and instead of needing, 10 people to lift something, you need one, right? Or, you can just, the kind of ways, the tools that you have to make things happen kind of fundamentally change. And then, anytime you're able to kind of reach a 10x like that, new things are possible that weren't possible before, right? Which is what's really interesting.
Incredible. All right. So news time. I know you pay close attention. What catches your attention?
I think there's a really interesting ongoing case that's kind of part of a larger big question in AI. And that's the New York Times suing OpenAI for using their articles, quote unquote, millions of articles as training data to train GPT-4. And the argument that New York Times is making is that, we put a lot of work in to write all these articles. We monetize, we create a lot of value with those articles, and we capture that value with a paywall on our website, right? Well, if someone can go get that same information from GPT-4, well, then they can circumvent that paywall on our website and get that information from GPT-4 because GPT-4 can basically recite it word for word. Now, what's interesting to me is that I would argue that by definition, news is only valuable when it's new. It's almost like in the word. So there's kind of a misunderstanding that I think the New York Times may have, or, the people that wrote that, the New York Times may have. OpenAI is trained up till April 2023 right now. So GPT-4 has information up to April 2023. So it doesn't have information of news after April 2023. So I think the kind of argument that they're trying to make is a little bit weakened by that one thing. Now, these models, again, kind of like we talked about earlier, do have access to tools, right? So GPT-4 can, go onto the web and then go and read the New York Times articles and then tell you that information, which actually does kind of undermine the value that they, claim to create with the paywall or with the articles that they write and they capture with the paywall. So, but that's kind of more of just like a feature. OpenAI could very easily take web scraping out, or just say that web scraping, you can't go to URLs that have New York Times in them, right? Or you can't go to these subset of URLs. And then what they'll do, and what they've already done, is go make deals with another news company to be able to go use their news as that kind of source news to answer questions, and they'll pay for it, right? But I think this is kind of coming a part of a larger trend that we can even see with Apple offering I think $50 million for any publishing company to be able to offer them all of the works that they've published to train a language model on. So if the New York Times is successful in suing OpenAI, I think the biggest losers will not be the big companies like Apple and OpenAI. OpenAI will just pay for it next time. They have enough money. They probably generate, they're probably close to generating $1 billion in revenue a month. So I would say that it's actually going to hurt open source more than anything, right? So that's the one worry I have. And I'm generally pro open source. Not generally, I'm absolutely pro open source. I think that's a pretty important thing to have for a number of reasons. But so that'll be pretty interesting. And I think it kind of comes, asks this major question of how do we think about copywriting and how do we think about owning an idea? And, it kind of makes us ask this question about ourselves is like, well, is any idea that we have completely untied to any other idea that anyone else has? Right. And, if you have a new idea, what's to say that you didn't use a bunch of other people's ideas to build on top of to build your own new idea? Right. And then what is the kind of point where that no longer is your idea and is actually just some unique combination of other ideas? And I think it's asking that big question because that's what AI does. Right. I mean, it takes the entire internet and it compresses it down into, some trillion of weights in GPT-4's case. Right. And then it's able to kind of recite the information in some capacity or do some sort of new combination or superposition of these ideas to kind of give you something that may or may not be unique, but oftentimes is relatively unique. So again, kind of back to the core theme that AI is making us ask a lot of very fundamental questions about what we thought was very much true and that we are kind of maybe now realizing that we need a maybe more fine-grained understanding of. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
The news story was everywhere. One comment or thing that, it's not my idea, some other idea that I took that I'm now, kind of claiming as building off as my own idea is how Grok is going to be a big winner from it because inherent in what Grok is that it builds off, it learns off of X's data of users and all of it's like news and, what's happening today. And, so they're going to be able to leverage that. And people that are like telling the news on X, I mean, they know that like they're getting distribution or whatever, but it's part of the deal and could benefit Grok a lot.
I think one of the things that we're seeing is network effects go a long way in the world of AI. And that's, what you see with X is like, because everyone uses it, everyone has to use it. And I think the same will be true for most successful companies in the next, 10 to 20 years is that they have a network effect. Because if you don't have a network effect, for the same reason that a single individual can now do something that it would used to take 10,000 people to do, if your differentiator is just that we've worked on it longer, that's going to become less and less valuable. What is going to become more, because it's always going to be easier to do something that you did before. And now we're reaching the point that it becomes so easy that almost anybody can do it, or we're, increasingly approaching that limit, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of a part of a larger trend that, network effects are important and they create a lot of value that it's hard to, recreate without them. As opposed to some sort of, we worked on this for longer, so you can't build it. Like maybe, I hate to call it names, but like, in sales, maybe in a lot of SaaS companies' cases, I won't, name any specifically, but in a lot of SaaS companies, what they have is a software without a network effect, right? And if you don't have that, someone will be able to recreate that exact same software, maybe even in a way that's even better serves them because it's more personalized, because they have AI agents that are doing it. They'll be able to create that software in a cheaper way than, using your product, or they'll be able to sell that software in a cheaper way than, selling your product. Right. So I think that's one of the big things that I've realized that is really important is to have a network effect in some capacity.
Yep. I'm right there with you. And, one of our personal network effects is just amount of followers we have and people paying attention to us. And so that's what the content machine is about. And that's what I'm going to, I've been working for 2.5 years behind the scenes, helping other people with their content machines, but I'm trying to do it for myself now and the projects I care about. And, also looking for more clients that I can help and, I'm doing 3 separate things now, and I might add a 4th in here too. And you've given me a lot of confidence that with all this new technology, I can make it happen. But, one of the core things, is a Good Future Media, our media agency that we help podcasters, people with long form content, get the short clips out and get them across platforms in a timely manner, in a continuous manner, and, build up following for them and brand awareness and everything like that. So I'm right there with you that, it's like you need, and as you as like the CEO of a company, it's like you got to be able to come on podcasts and
how are we going to build a valuable company? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that too, right? There's a lot of value in, coming on a podcast, you get a lot of distribution on, right? Or putting an ad on a podcast, so you get a lot of distribution on.
And I just feel like, another reason I've done this podcast is my dad was like, how are you going to be able to trust anything in the future? You don't know if it's AI or not. And, it's going to be all this disinformation and stuff. It's like, yeah, well, it's still the faces, like people and like, that blue check mark and like profiles that have been social media profiles that have been, been around for years and have built this trust with their audience. And that, when they say something, they know, that they mean it, and that, this is a real person. And so that I'm kind of compelling people, like, you got to just get used to just, hey, put yourself out there. What are you scared of? Like, just represent yourself. We're all living these like doppelganger lives online. And it's not, of course, if somebody sees a 1-minute clip of you or something, that's not who you are. It's just who you are representing yourself to be for a minute at a time,
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's a great point. I think, some sort of proof of personhood and proof of being a human is going to be really important. And one of the things that I hadn't thought about until you just mentioned it is by kind of having a following that you've built over time from the maybe pre-AI stage, right? That's kind of a proof of personhood in its own, right? If you got a blue check mark is kind of proof of personhood in some capacity, but like, if you just have a lot of people that followed you from before AI was like really a thing that you had to worry about, like whether something was an AI or not, like, well, there's probably a pretty good chance that you're a real person because people follow
even now, like, starting a new social media profile today. And it's like, if you're trying to use AI to write all your content and be your brand or whatever, it's not going to, resonate with people. It's like, you have to have that heart.
Right. If you could go get that same information from an AI for completely free and exactly how you want it, then nobody's going to follow you. Right. But if you add new information, that in itself is almost like a proof of personhood, because, today I think, AI is a fundamentally interpolative like tool today, right? Like it's just what we already know kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of, there's all sorts of stuff like DeepMind's fund search paper where it can create new things, but that's a that's a result of iteration and testing against a known objective. But anyways, I think that's a
all right, Alex, you're an AI expert. What are the 3 AI tools that you use every day that you love to use?
GPT-4, I think, is just the best catch-all. I think it will continue to be, at least for the foreseeable future, as they add more, tooling capabilities to it. That's what they're going for. I think that's what they're trying to build. I think if you don't already have a ChatGPT Plus account or whatever their premium version of their account is called, you should definitely get one, and you should definitely start using it and try things that you don't think are going to work, because I think oftentimes you'll be surprised that they do. So that's number one. I think as an engineer, I really like Cursor. Cursor is an IDE. It's very similar to VS Code in terms of how it feels, but it has, a lot of AI tools integrated with it, a lot of which are incredibly useful. I think that's probably made, how fast I can build something much faster. That's another one that I've most recently really been a fan of. And then I think outside of that, I can't say that I use any other AI tools outside of my own. I do think that my own is pretty exciting to use, but that's more of like I kind of have to use it even if I didn't like it. So
yeah. I'm sure you're iterating on that every day, and in there.
Yeah. I'll send it to you too. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. We just sent out to about 30 investors just to get an initial idea.
Nice.
Iron out any issues, but then we'll.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah. Well, that's who we're building for, man. We're building for the people that normally wouldn't have access to the deals and opportunities and agents and information that normally an institution would only have access to, or a massive investor, a massive private capital investor. We're trying to kind of bring that information to any investor by kind of alleviating the scaling problems that stop a broker from doing that today. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're building, and that's what we want to do.
All right, Alex. Well, thank you so much for coming on the ImagineAI podcast, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Absolutely, man. Wonderful talking, as always. And I look forward to talking more and getting on and seeing this grow too. I think it's going to be something pretty special. So looking forward
Thank you, man. Every day. It's what I'm promising myself. So
I feel you, man.
All right.
I feel you.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.